Okay, did you hear recording in
Yes,
progress?
I can hear it. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, hi everyone. Today I have Phil Halper with me. He's skydivephil. His YouTube channel is fantastic. He has talked with Alex Malpass, Dan Linford. I highly recommend his YouTube channel. Is there anything else you want to say about yourself, Phil?
Well, the main thing is I have a book coming out in May. That's The Battle of the Big Bang, which I've written with the cosmologist Nia Shafshordi for University of Chicago Press. And we're really super excited about that. It's about sort of competing models for the early universe. And I've interviewed, a lot of the big names, Stephen Hawking, Roger Penrose, Alan Guth. And Nia is an award-winning cosmologist who's been featured on the front cover of Scientific American. So we're just super excited about that. It's coming out at the end of May, but you can pre-order it now on Amazon. The Battle of the Big Bang.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I just wanna, I guess, tell you like something about me, like why I want to chat with you, right? I have this YouTube channel called Absolute Optimist. I mean, it's not really a podcast, right? I mean, you could call it a podcast or something, but it's more like I chat with people who I like, whose content I like, right? So it's not like I'm inviting like totally random philosophers or like totally random people, right? I chat with people who I like, whose work I like, I respect, I admire, right? Who helped me, I guess, refine my worldview in some way, right? So I should mention I know you for a long time. I watched your videos on animal suffering and responded when you responded to William Lane Craig. I think your wife is also featured in those videos, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
she narrates it. She narrates it. Yeah.
yeah. So, fantastic responses, right? You do really good work. Your responses are really plausible. They are
Thank you.
fantastic, right?
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Um, I knew you since like 2018, 2019, when I knew the new atheists like Matt Dillahunty, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, um, right. I think George Carlin also was kind of good, like his comedy was good.
He's funny. Yeah, well, he was funny. Yeah.
So good stuff, right? I was an atheist at that time. Then I slowly, I guess, became agnostic when I encountered like some really respected philosophers like Joshua Rasmussen. I don't know if you know him.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think Alex Malpass also knows him. He's just brilliant, a very compassionate philosopher, right? And he's a universalist, by the way. He believes in universal salvation, so no eternal hell, according to even him. Um, I don't know if you know David Bentley Hart.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, great, fantastic. So he's pretty good too. So um, basically, to me, what really like problem of evil and divine hiddenness at that time was the main thing, right?
Mhm.
And basically the evolutionary problem of evil, right? The teleological one. It's like it seems like it's built in. Like the suffering is just built in. Like you cannot escape, right? So, and I never found the free will responses plausible. I think they were bad. They were terrible, right? Um, because most of the suffering is because like is on animals, right? Most of suffering in the world is of animals. So I never found the free will responses plausible, right? The soul building were like, yeah, maybe like the theist I became, I was like when I became a theist, I was already a universalist basically, which by universalism I just mean that eventually all sentient beings will be happy. They have to be happy, right? Eventually they have to be happy and forever, right? Like if God is compassionate and like triomni, right? Omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, then it makes no sense that God would either destroy someone's soul or let it be destroyed or torture someone forever or let themselves be tortured forever, right? All of that never made sense to me. I became Christian later, right?
Mhm.
Like the first I became a theist, right? And when I was a theist, I was already a universalist. Do you know Thomas Paine? Like he was a an
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
American philosopher. He was a deistic philosopher, right?
Yeah.
But he did believe in the afterlife, right? He did believe in a God. I think he did believe in a triomni God, but he was just not a Christian. Right? He did not
That's
subscribe
right.
to.
I think, well, yeah. Well, I don't know if he thought God was triomni. I mean, you'll have to, I'll trust you on that. But he believed in a God, a creator of the universe. But um, I don't know that what other properties he would ascribe to that
Yeah, I mean,
creator.
I suppose like the reason I think it's implied it's triomni because I mean, look, if you believe God is omnibenevolent but God is not omnipotent, then it could be like maybe there are some tragedies, right? Real tragedies.
But
Maybe.
I think for the deists, I mean, I don't know about Thomas Paine specifically, so someone
Okay,
who
yeah.
knows can comment, and maybe you can tell me. But I think for the deists, the view was just there is an intelligent being that created the universe, but they don't intervene, and they don't necessarily have all the omni properties they
Okay,
might have.
okay,
But
cool, cool.
I don't think it follows from deism that they do.
But I do, but I did read Thomas Paine's quote in which he did believe in a happiness for all, like happiness at least, like
Right.
he said, like
Okay.
um, I expect future happiness for me, afterlife for me, right?
Okay.
And I mean, given his like left-wing beliefs, like he was quite social liberal, right? And it seemed to me he was a compassionate person, so I think he would believe a kind of a universal salvation, right? Generally, the theists who are like compassionate, who are not like extremely traditional or like
Right,
dogmatic.
but you could have universal salvation without a triomni God, right?
You could, but I think it's more like, I guess you could say, like with limited God theism, there could be, like, you have to at least sometimes say that there is some pointless suffering, right? Like some suffering is not for really for the greater good, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Because God is taking his own time, right? Like he is not that powerful to like secure the reality
Mhm.
completely, right? So I mean, yeah, I guess, but yeah, I guess I was just talking about like my journey.
Mhm.
So I did become an agnostic. I think Joe Schmid, I think you already know him, right? Majesty of
I know
Reason.
Joe. I've been on Joe's show several times, and he's been on
Yeah,
our show as well. So we have a show, me, Alex Malpass, and Dan Linford, called the
yeah, that dude is
Sci-Fi Show, and Joe's been on that.
Joe Schmid is a genius. I mean,
He's very smart.
he's
Yeah.
he's he's extremely smart. He's an agnostic. Um, have you heard of Matthew Edelstein?
No.
Okay, so he talked with Joe, I think recently. I knew Matthew, Joe, and all these like these young people, philosophers of religion for quite a while, even when they were like new. Like I knew Joe Schmidt when his channel was like very new, right?
Mhm.
So I mean, really fantastic dude. Like when he was making his case for like agnosticism, right? Like why he's an agnostic. And he was listing a bunch of stuff, right, for atheism and for theism. When I encountered basically like universal salvation, to me, the problem of evil, like the plausibility of problem of evil did not really seem that strong. Because, I always like assumed that theism, like before encountering Joshua Rasmussen and like David Bentley Hart and these theists, I actually kind of assume that eternal hell is like a package. If you accept theism, you have to believe in eternal hell. And I guess and I was of course wrong about that when I like realized that, hey, look, it's there are other theism, right, available. And I thought, okay, that seems plausible, right? And when it comes to, I think, divine hiddenness, I found like, have you heard of Michael Ree?
No.
Okay, he's another philosopher of religion, and he specifically dealt with the problem of divine hiddenness in his
Yeah,
book.
that's not an area I've done any sort of serious work on. So yeah, I've only published
Okay.
papers on the problem of animal suffering
Yeah, I
and
think, yeah,
alarm
yeah.
cosmological argument, but
So I
so
guess
that's kind of my remit. Yeah.
great, great. So I want to ask like your history, Phil. Like,
Mhm.
why did you become so interested in this stuff, right? Like philosophy of religion, animal suffering, and stuff like that, right?
So I guess I was brought up Jewish, and I was a believer. And then during my teenage years, I mean, it's a pretty common story, so nothing unusual about me. I eventually turned against my faith, and I think the reason, well, there's probably more than one reason, but probably the primary reason was the Passover story, because every year, if you're a Jew, you have to do the Passover ceremony. And I have to sing in Hebrew a song called the Manish Tana. I could sing it for you now if you want, but I'm not going to. Don't worry.
So,
Um, but it basically asks the head of the household, which of course is always a man, to explain, what's going on the Passover, and they tell the story, and it's a whole ceremony. And eventually, I realized that God sends these 10 plagues to the Egyptians, and they're incredibly awful. The first plague is to turn all the water into blood and all the fish drown. Um, the cattle die in another plague. Locusts come in another plague. The last plague is to kill all the firstborn, and not just the firstborn Egyptians, which I thought was incredibly unjust. I mean, imagine a weapon that was designed to target the children of the enemy. I mean, any um, military force that developed that would just be horrendously immoral. But yet, that's exactly what God does. But not just the firstborn people, but also their animals. And at some point, I think the lights just came on, and I went, "Oh my God, the God of the Bible is a monster." And so this phrase "moral monster" was with me long, long, long before I'd ever heard of Richard Dawkins. Um, that set me on my journey, I guess. But then, so that was in my teenage years. And then I did volunteer work with the Dolphin Intelligence Research Program in Hawaii. And so I tried to follow the literature on dolphin intelligence. So what happened was I went back to college to study astronomy. And when I was doing that, someone said, come down to this debate. And it was William Lane Craig versus Stephen Law. So I was there in the audience when William Lane Craig made this claim that the way to deal with the problem of animal suffering is to suggest that animals are not aware of their pain because they don't have a prefrontal cortex. Um, so they're not self-aware. And if they're not self-aware, they can't be aware of their pain. So, and I didn't know anything about prefrontal cortex at this point, but I'd followed the literature on dolphin intelligence and I knew they'd passed multiple tests for self-awareness. So I thought this claim has to be false. Um, or at least if it's not, I would say maybe it has to be false is too strong. It looks extremely dodgy, let's put it that way. Either the tests that we have for self-awareness are valid, in which case they are self-aware, so Craig is wrong, or we don't have any valid tests for self-awareness, in which case what he said wouldn't necessarily be wrong, but it would be unjustified. So to me, it was just obvious that Craig was kind of making stuff up. And so I set out to sort of interview people who were experts in this field. I had an ex-girlfriend actually who was a neuroscientist. So she was one of the first people I spoke to. She actually appeared in the first film that I made on this topic. And all the experts I spoke to were like, this is nonsense. Um, and then what happened? So I did make that film. Then Craig did a reply film. And I remember the night that that came out, I was very nervous because I thought, here's, one of the leading Christian philosophers in the world, just going to do half an hour trying to take down my video. And I thought, my God, what mistakes did I make? Let's see what he's got to say. And at the end of that half hour, I was like, wow, these criticisms are going to be super easy to deal with because they're terrible. They're really, really bad. So we made a reply video, and then there was a long back and forth. Went back and forth many, many times. I ended up doing a show, unbelievable podcast, Justin Briley hosting, and then Michael Murray, who was kind of, in some sense, the sort of source author for William Lane Craig, and his claims about animal suffering. Michael Murray and I did a show together, and as that was happening, I learned of a patient. I can't remember if I actually even mentioned it in the show, but I learned about a patient who had their prefrontal cortex destroyed, and I thought, oh my God, what an amazing test this will be of the claims of William Lane Craig. Um, so they tested his self-awareness, and it was perfectly intact, even though his prefrontal cortex was destroyed. He was completely self-aware. So that claim that, the prefrontal cortex is needed for self-awareness was totally disproved. Um, then I wrote to the people that did the study, and I said, what about testing his pain perception? Because I think this has been more. I mean, this story, when this patient R study came out, it made the news. It was on Scientific American. It was in various different publications. It was a really big deal. Um, and I said to them, but I think your paper has more implications than even what you've written up so far, because it will have relevance for this question of which animals can feel pain and so on. And they were like, yeah, this is great stuff. One of the authors was a neuroscientist called David Woodroffe, and he said we should write this up as a paper. And in fact, they're already doing tests for his pain perception. So it turned out his pain perception was off the chart. It was much higher than normal. The technical term is hyperpathic to pain. So this totally blew Craig's claims out of the water. So me and David, and then David introduced me to the philosopher on the study, Ken Williford, and we've been writing papers on this ever since. So we've done how many have we done? One, two, I think three so far, but we've got more in the works, I think. So yeah, that's been my journey.
Thanks, powerful, like extremely powerful, I mean, it's like, I will say this because this is important. I never find what Craig said to be plausible, right? Especially about problem of evil.
Mm.
And even if he was a universalist, when he says like animals don't feel pain, like you immediately find that is just straight up wrong, given all the collective body of knowledge we have, right? And
Yeah, but I
I
should
think
add that it's not just Craig saying this. I mean, there's a long tradition in Christian thought
yes,
that animal pain is not morally relevant. So C.S. Lewis made a very similar argument, and it goes all the way back to Augustine, Thomas Aquinas.
yeah,
They've
man,
all
yeah,
made Descartes, of course, most famously. They've all made variations on this argument. They're all pretty similar to each other. There may be subtle differences, but the
yeah,
basic bottom line is kind of the same. So there's a very long tradition of this in Christian thought, and I think even Craig's PhD advisor or supervisor, I think was Hick. Was it Hick? I think Hick also had a similar view.
yeah.
So
I
it's
mean,
nothing new here.
I know, I
Yeah.
know. Yeah, because yeah, René Descartes also, right?
Yeah. And
He was,
Augustine actually had an interesting argument for this because what he did was he quoted the story of Legion, where, for those that aren't familiar with it, Jesus basically expels some demons into a herd of 2,000 pigs.
yeah,
And then the 2,000 pigs run off a cliff and drown. So Augustine basically says, well, that proves that animals don't have moral worth because no way, I mean, I was kind of paraphrasing here, but Jesus wouldn't do that if they did. So the fact that
but
he did means they don't.
I mean, that's
So
just strange considering, like, well, God does that to human beings too, like horrible stuff to human beings too, plagues, hardening of hearts.
yeah, but Augustine basically makes the argument, well, you can blame humans for what they do, so they could deserve it, but the animals can't deserve it. They don't, they're not moral actors, they can't be blamed for anything that they do. So that I
Yeah,
think that was
I mean
that's
the
my recollection of what Augustine was
yeah,
arguing.
yeah. I mean, he believed in original sin, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I
And
mean,
and C.S. Lewis said something very similar. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something like animals can neither be blamed by for their sin, nor can they be improved by their suffering. So animal suffering must be an illusion.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's so surreal, like how different these people's theology are to mine and like other philosophers, right?
Mhm.
Like um. So let me give an example of like historical, like historically, and even now, like theologians who were at least more compassionate leaning compared to like Augustine, Aquinas, and others. So I think Gregory of Nyssa, Origen, they were relatively more compassionate. I would say much more compassionate.
Wasn't Origin kind of excommunicated?
Yeah, I mean, Origin was excommunicated, but his like not all, absolutely all of his theology was excommunicated. He was excommunicated, he was condemned, but I
Yeah.
think for specific view he was condemned, right?
Yeah.
Um, there are like Eastern Orthodox and Christian philosophers who have written on this, right? Church authors.
Hmm.
Like what specifically was Origin condemned for? Um, But like I'm just like giving you like examples of like how diverse the theology has been within like Christian tradition. Um and not just I think Christian, even in Hindu tradition,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
Like
obviously
even
that's a
in
very different story. Yeah, and
Hindu,
The Jains in particular, of course, are have a very different view.
yeah,
They're very
Jains.
compassionate to animals.
Jains. And not only that, right? Like Hinduism is so diverse that there is like a literal view in which there is like no free will view. And they believed in God.
Yeah,
They believed in fate, right? So
right,
Hinduism
right.
is very diverse, right?
Yeah, indeed, and as is Christianity. I mean, some Christians don't believe in free will either. So,
Yeah, I also don't believe in free will.
right,
So,
okay. So,
yeah,
I mean, I think all big religions are going to be broad tents, with
yeah,
lots of diverse views in them.
yeah.
So,
Islam
yeah,
also
I
has it, Islam also has it, I would say. Like Ahmadi are different, Sunni Orthodox are different, Sufis are different, so I
yeah,
mean, they have
yeah.
much more diversity. And, one of the things I do with like my theology, my philosophy, my worldview, right? It's like I point people to something different. Again, I point them this, right? I don't like say if you don't believe this, you will go to like even the temporary hell, right? Like I do not believe that atheists, agnostics, queer people go to even the temporary hell because I think that God like the punishment, of course, given like I don't believe in free will, I have different view of
Okay,
punishment, right? I do not believe in
yeah.
retributive punishment, kind of like Immanuel Kant. So Immanuel Kant believed in like retributive justice, right? And I think he gave an example where if large amount of people were escaping an island and there were like prisoners that need to be executed, that need to be killed, they have to kill the prisoners even if it benefits absolutely no. There is no deterrence effect, there is no restoration or like rehabilitation, no
Hmm.
reformation. Like I think there is even I probably no place for even mercy for them, right? I think in Kant's retributive justice. I read like the recent book by Alan Wood. He is a Kantian ethicist, neo-Kantian you could say, and he says like Kantian ethics as a system of ethics cannot justify retributive justice, right? It's like he straight up says it. Like Kant himself did believe in retributive justice, but Kantian ethics cannot actually justify retributive justice. And like recently, like I've seen like the justifications of retribution. Like I've read like Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on retributive justice,
Hmm.
and even that article says like it's very hard to justify retributive justice, right? So, well, I don't believe in retributive justice, right? So, but William Lane Craig does. I think Augustine, Aquinas, and all these people did,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
And one of the thing is like I always thought like they argue all this stuff. Okay, so animals don't matter. They are going to die. They're not
Right.
going to heaven. Like I think Edward Phaser. Have you know Edward's Phaser?
Yes,
Theism
yes, I know.
literally says that dogs don't go to heaven, right? So, like,
Well, I mean, he's a Catholic, right?
yeah,
That is the Catholic tradition, no question about that.
yes.
Not
I
that
mean,
every Catholic buys into that, but that is certainly the mainstream Catholic view. And of course, it goes back to Aquinas, and as you
yeah,
said,
yeah. And I mean, I always think like how, so okay, animals just suffer and die, right? They don't matter. Half of the probably like Aquinas believe in mass damnation, by the way. So that means most human beings are going to eternal hell.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I think the view was that this goes back actually even before Augustine, to Aristotle, who believed in this thing called the rational soul. So you could have a soul, but there are different types of soul, and the
yeah,
one that you
yeah,
need
rational and
for sort
sensitive.
of yeah. So their argument was, well, there's this particular type of soul, the rational soul, and that's what you need for moral worth. That's what you need to go to heaven.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
animals, they have a
And
soul, but they don't have a rational soul.
yeah,
So that was their belief. And if you
yeah,
believe that, then okay, I guess they all follow. So it's really just coming from a wrong belief, in my opinion.
yeah, yeah, exactly, right. It's also like a bizarre metaphysics, right? Where human beings are so disconnected from animals, like so extremely disconnected. That seems just bizarre given all the modern research that we have, right?
Right, but it wouldn't have seemed bizarre maybe to someone in the past,
Yeah, yeah, of course,
because
of course. But
they
I'm more
wouldn't
like
necessarily
talking
know
about,
what we know today.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm more about talking about now, right?
Okay.
I'm more
Yeah.
like talking about like Craig and Phaser and like
Mhm.
these philosophers. Uh,
Well,
yeah,
they have to believe this because, well, I shouldn't say they have to believe this, but what we've done in one of our papers, we put this thing out called the expanded problem of animal suffering.
yeah,
And what we say is that the problem of animal suffering is much worse than what people tend to generally um, use. So, for example, what's normally used is this example from William Rowe, and they talk about the deer, or the fawn is baby deer, and it's struck by lightning, or there's a forest fire from lightning, and it's sort of
yeah,
burning to death, and that is obviously very bad. But what we point out is it's much, much worse than that. Because not only, as you said, you pointed out that you have this evolutionary problem, like it's the suffering sort of built into the very engine of our creation.
yeah,
Um, but even worse than that, you also have, how long it's been going on for, like hundreds of millions of years.
yeah,
And then also you have what we point out, and that I just don't think is ever mentioned in the literature on animal suffering, and that we thought, no, this needs to be put on the table. The Christians need to explain this as well, which is all the suffering that God either directly causes, like the flood or the 10 plagues or the story of Legion and so on, but also all the suffering of animals that he commands others to do.
commands. Yeah,
So, yeah, I mean, a good example is that in Deuteronomy, we're told that if there's a town that's suggests you should worship other gods, everyone in that town should be killed, including their animals. Of course, you've got animal sacrifice. I mean, I mean, I could go on forever about
yeah,
how many examples there are. And then the last problem is what we point out is that there's a mass extinction event happening right now. And this is primarily caused by human consumption of meat. And God could just easily change that. He could either like give us a genetic mutation so that we couldn't eat meat, or he could maybe just command that we shouldn't eat meat, or even just command that we eat meat less.
yeah,
That would enormously alleviate this incredible catastrophe that's happening.
yes,
Yet he does nothing. So now, if neo-Cartesianism is true, all of these problems go away,
yeah,
right? So you can see how
right.
tempting it is, right? So I should explain to your viewers that neo-Cartesianism, neo-Cartesianism is the view that animals may be sentient, but their suffering is not morally relevant, either
Yes,
because they don't have the right type of self-awareness, or they don't have the right what's called affect. So affect in neuroscience is the sort of emotive state that accompanies a conscious state. So if you have some kind of pain process and
yeah,
you dislike it, that negative valence to it, that's called affect. So affect with an A.
Yeah, yeah.
So either they don't have the affect or the self-awareness or something like that. So that's what neo-Cartesianism is. And you can see how tempting it is to the theist, right? If that
Yes,
were
yes.
true, if it were true, wow, all the worst problems for theism just disappear. So
Yeah, I mean,
I totally understand why they go for it. It's
yeah,
just not, the problem is it's not true.
yeah, right. I mean, to me, I don't know if that was tempting. Like when I became a theist, when I was an atheist, I never liked that response. And when I became a theist, I still never liked that response because it's more like, okay, the
Yeah,
whole thing with like moral relevance, because I guess it's more about ethics itself, meta ethics and
yeah,
ethics itself, right? Like what's plausible.
right.
And to me, if you love someone, pain is the last thing you do. And you only do that if you want to avoid the greater pain in the future. It's for the greater good.
Hmm.
If you want to say someone is loving, it's just that if that being causes that much pain, you better believe it has to be for the greater good, right? I mean, like it has to be like if you believe in God, right? Triomni God, I mean theism, right? Not
Right.
Goss limited God theism, right? If you believe in the
Yeah.
triomni, you have to believe it's for the greater good. Any pain to me, right? If you like, of
Well, you
course,
could say though, like, okay, so there are some, you look at the Neo-Cartesian view,
yeah, yeah,
and so do I, and we both come to the same conclusion that it is implausible.
yeah,
That it's so implausible that we should just write it off. Um, but you could do the same for this notion that there's a greater good to some of the suffering that we
yeah,
see in
yeah,
the animal
exactly.
world.
And
So that one example that we give, we think it's a better example than William Rowe's example because in Rowe's example, at least the fawn could be food for another animal. But in the example we give, and also his example is imaginary. I mean, it's very plausible. I'm sure this sort of thing happens all the time. But the example we give is an animal caught in a predator trap. So a predator trap is basically sort of sticky material that an animal gets caught in. And then predators might say, ah, look, there's an animal very vulnerable. I've got an easy meal here. So they go in for the kill, but they get stuck too.
yeah,
And at the La Brea tar pits, there's a remains of like 4,000 animals that died in this horrendous way. I think it's this sort of equally implausible to think that that has some greater good as
yeah,
the
yeah.
animals don't
Sure,
suffer.
sure. So
Um,
the greater good is, yeah. You said at a certain point, it does become fundamentally about intuitions, what you find plausible, what I find
yeah,
plausible, I guess. At a certain
yeah,
point, it does go. To me, like, since I don't believe purely atheists or agnostics, purely for their atheism or agnosticism will not go to hell. So it's not like I have this extreme urge to like really convert them.
right.
And then like if they don't convert, I don't have this metaphysics or like epistemology where I say they are just they just want to sin, they just want to cause this or that. Like as I said, I don't believe in free will, right? So I don't even think
Okay.
that I think that all this stuff that I'm saying, it can at a certain point, maybe not now, maybe in the future, maybe now, may influence someone. Maybe it will influence you. Maybe it will make you like just think, okay, maybe 10 years later, or maybe now, maybe later, right now, like few hours later. Yeah, that's maybe plausible, I guess. Or maybe don't, right? Maybe in your whole life you will not find what I'm going to say
Well,
to you.
I think let me say this that
Yeah.
I think universalism is plausible if there is a triomni God. Like
Yeah.
if you just take that there's a triomni God, then universalism looks very plausible to me.
Yes.
However, if I read the biblical text,
Yes.
the silence o- on this question is very loud to me.
Yeah,
Like
I
I would
know.
have thought that it would say it explicitly.
Yes.
Particularly think of it this way. We could actually sort of run a little argument here. Like Augustine makes this argument that animals don't have moral worth, and he does this based off of reading the Bible.
Yeah,
Um, and God knows that Augustine is going to make this argument. He knows it's coming, and he knows it's going to be enormously influential. That basically Christianity, for the most part, buys into what Augustine says. Aquinas does, and so
yeah,
down the ages, he knows that this is going to be the attitude. Given his knowledge of that, and suppose that universalism is true, um, I would have thought he'd have an enormous incentive to say it and to guide the text to make it clear. And my reading of the Christian, I mean, in Judaism it's different because Judaism traditionally, I mean, originally, I say originally, I mean, I think in the period that the Bible was probably written, um, my thinking is that the Jews didn't believe in an afterlife at all.
yeah,
Then later on, as we get closer to the sort of period of Jesus, then an afterlife sort of did come to be a view within
yeah,
Judaism. Um, and to me, the view of the sort of lake of fire, torture, hell, it does seem to be in the text. Like I think the plainest reading of the text,
yes,
that's what they say. So it's yeah, I agree that universalism seems like what should follow if you have a triune God and you assume nothing else. But once you sort of ascribe to Christianity, um, or one of the other Abrahamic faiths, then it becomes more difficult. I mean, I'm not an
yeah,
expert on all these texts, so I know some people can list them all off the top of their head, but I can't do
yeah.
that. So,
Um,
but that's what it appears to me to be.
so you are absolutely correct. I will say that. I think biblical scholars will also say that. Like, it's difficult. Like, the Bible is not, it's not like a mathematical, coherent, like engineering journal or like science textbook, right? It's not like that at all. Much far from it. Lots of metaphors, allegories, and lots of stuff, right? And lots of bizarre stuff too, lots of contradictory stuff. And like the biblical scholars would say, like gospel authors, like disagreed, like gospel authors, like so, like Paul and Matthew, right? So Paul, I think Paul believed that celibacy is the ideal; it's a spiritual gift. That's what I think Dan McClellan, I think, says, right? Have you known like Dan McClellan?
Yeah, I've heard, I don't know his stuff very well, but
Okay, so
yes.
so yeah, he's a biblical scholar. He says like Paul believed like celibacy is the ideal. It's a spiritual gift. Um, Also, you already know Joshua Bowen probably,
Hmm.
right? Uh, Derek Lambert, Joshua Bowen. You
Yeah, yeah,
probably already know all of them. Yeah.
yeah.
So Joshua Bowen has published his book where he basically argues that Bible does not condemn slavery, right?
Right.
Um, you could also say like Bible does not seem to give any view on death penalty, right? But right now
Well,
the
I think the
Bible.
Bible's pretty clear the death penalty is okay.
Okay, yeah, sure, sure,
I mean,
sure.
it's the
Let's
death
let's
penalty
grant.
is
Sure,
given as a penalty multiple times. So yeah, I mean that's in the Old Testament, of course.
sure,
Uh,
sure.
yeah,
Let me grant that, right? So my point is that Bible is a mess, right? It's a
agree.
mess.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah,
I will say that.
yeah.
Now, of
Well, I mean,
course,
of course, it almost certainly has many different authors.
yeah,
So, what would we expect?
yeah. So look, I am not the kind of universalist or like Bible first universalist.
Right.
When I became a theist,
Yeah.
universal salvation was non-negotiable.
Okay.
And I mean, I'm using the word salvation. It's like salvation from what? It's a very Christian word, right? I meant more like universal happiness, right? Which is like all sentient beings. To me, even a flower permanently decaying or dying, or even a tree permanently dying or decaying, is something that's that's off the table, even to me, right? Even trees, right? So I think even trees, flowers, they shall be fine. Now, of course, what about viruses and stuff like that? I just say to them, maybe they will just change forms or something. They'll be like Pokemons or something. I mean, so look, universal happiness is non-negotiable, considering I believed in the triomni God, right? Um, when I became a Christian, I did not become a Christian because of the phaser, Craig, and all these theologians, right? I call them right wing. These are right wing
Okay. Well,
theologians.
they are. Yeah.
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 I became a Christian because of more left wing theologians and more like biblical scholars who themselves are Christians, I think.
Okay.
Right? Like Dan McClellan is a Mormon, right? Um, all that stuff about Bible being a mess did not seem to shake his faith still, right? Like there are still like Catholics, I think, who literally say that Catholic Church's view has fundamentally changed, right?
Well, of course. Yeah.
I consider them left-wing Catholics too, right? So
Yeah.
so my point is, Phil, there are like these particular Christians, and the way I interpret the Bible, like when you talk about those difficult verses, right?
Mhm.
There are a bunch of views you can take, right? And I think they are on the table. So I would
Okay.
say I am willing to say Paul was wrong about a few things or something. Straight up.
Right.
I'm
Okay.
willing to
Good.
say it.
But let's ask you about like some of these. Let's give you a few passages. Like Deuteronomy, that passage I mentioned, um, where the town, where we're told to kill everyone in the town, that goes, let's go and worship another god and their animals.
Yeah.
Um, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah. So like right now I have not read a specific theologian to deal with that, but like right now
Yep.
just improvising, I would
Do you
say
want me to read you the passage? I probably have it somewhere.
sure,
But
sure, you can read it.
let me see if I can find it. Hang on.
Sure, sure, sure.
Um, let's see. Hang on. Oh, here it is. So it's Deuteronomy 13. If you hear it said about one of the towns the Lord your God is giving you to live in, that troublemakers, sorry, it's Deuteronomy 13, it starts 12. Anyway, sorry, that the troublemakers have risen among you and have led the people of the town astray, saying, let us go and worship other gods, gods you have not known. Then you must inquire, probe, and investigate it thoroughly. And if it is true, and it has been proved that this detestable thing has been done among you, you must certainly put to the sword all who live in that town. You must destroy it completely, both its people and its livestock. So, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so just improvising.
Hmm.
Um, I would say that like given my background beliefs, I'm a consequentialist, by the way.
Okay. Okay.
So not a deontologist, right? So
Okay. Okay.
to me, it's not like there is very strict letting die versus yourself killing someone distinction. I don't believe it that strongly. I do not believe in like killing versus allowing distinction, right? That like
Okay.
it's
Okay.
very so I can take the option plausibly and still believe by saying, yeah, God commanded that at that time. Now,
Okay.
why did he command that? I don't know. Like, like, like maybe you could say maybe those people at that time, those particular people at that particular time had certain, and those animals too, had certain kind of like you could call it a virus infection or you could call it demons, right? Or something.
So the animals, including like
Yeah,
all the people in the town and the
yeah. If
animals.
if you believe that demons does not just involve sentient being influencing other sentient being,
Well,
if you
what do you believe?
include
Like, what do you think about this? I
like
mean,
right now I'm improvising. Right now I'm just
I
saying,
totally
yeah,
understand. It's an
yeah,
improvised thing. So,
yeah,
so basically, if I understand you correctly, you're saying
yeah.
they've got some kind of mind virus,
Yeah, it could
like a
be
demon
physical
possession or
virus. It
something like
could be
that.
physical virus,
Okay.
right?
But
And they need
including the
to,
animals, but basically it does say it never mentions that they've got a virus. It just says
yeah, it never
if
does.
if they say it, if the people of the town basically advocate going to a different religion, that's
Yeah,
basically what they're saying, right?
yeah.
Then kill them all and their animals.
Yeah,
So
that's what it says.
it doesn't
Yeah.
really seem very plausible that the animals were possessed by a demon. Like, wouldn't it say if the animal was possessed by a demon, you're gonna have to
Yeah, I
kill it?
mean, that's the thing, right? Like I believe that, well, Bible is not clear, right? It's not that clear about that stuff, right?
Well, I
So,
think it is. I mean, to me, it is extremely clear. Like, it's basically an ideology of power. Like, to me, this is very, very clear. Like,
yeah,
they want obedience. I mean, the theme of the Bible, to me, is obedience. That's the founding moment when Abraham takes his son Isaac up onto the altar, and he's saying, "Yes,
yeah,
I will kill my own child. I will follow the most ludicrous order that you can give." To me, it's very clear. It's all about obedience. We want you to be obedient.
yeah,
So, um, so to me, this order is incredibly harsh,
yes,
but it makes perfect sense if you are a sort of fascist dictator who doesn't
yes.
care,
Who
who
doesn't care?
like,
Yeah,
just has no empathy. They just want power.
yes,
In that context, it makes absolutely perfect sense, and it's clear
yes.
as a clear sky.
You can interpret it that way. There are Christians, there are Jewish, like religious Jewish people, right?
Mm,
Who literally say God is not omnibenevolent, right? There's Mark C. Murphy. He published his book saying exactly that, like recently, 2021, right? He argued that God is not essentially omnibenevolent, basically. So God is not
mm.
perfect, morally perfect, right? So I mean, I don't take that view. I like it's one interpretation you could. I mean, Christian nationalists do that, right?
Yeah, okay.
Calling Christians
Well,
fascists. So,
but
so
then,
the
so
thing is,
let me ask you a question. Why not
why not take that one?
take the view that God is not good, or at least the God of the Bible isn't good?
Yeah. So remember that I did not first became a Christian and then became a theist. I first became a theist and
Okay,
then moved toward it.
okay.
And that's not because of these right-wing beliefs, right?
No,
To
no.
me, omnibenevolence, I think all the triomni are non-negotiable, along with
Right.
universal happiness.
Okay.
And then I pick like which mainstream religion seems like most likely, or at least which mainstream religion seem to at least have this, like at least I can make it like interpret the scripture in such a way that compassion can be the central view,
But
right?
don't you think Jains are much more compassionate? I mean, their central principle, or at least one of their
The
core
reason
principles,
I
is
guess,
non-violence.
yes, they are very compassionate, but there are issues with metaphysics, I guess, right? Like karma system, I think is an issue, like the rebirth amnesia and the karma system, right? Because so one issue is like my friend Amos Wolin like published a fantastic article on this, which is that look, if you believe that people who are poor right now are poor because of their past crimes, right?
Mhm.
So if you believe that they deserve it, why would you help them? Right. And they do have responses. Like I have a Hindu friend who has a response to that. Right. Um, I just do not find that response that plausible.
Okay.
So I mean, and another issue is like a more like centralization. I do like the centralization of Eastern Orthodox and Catholic churches. Again, I'm not, so I'm more leaning toward Eastern Orthodox kind of
Okay.
centralization.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
rather than the singular Pope one, where the Pope is infallible and also supreme, right? Um,
Well, I think he's only infallible on matters of what's the phrase?
ex cathedra.
Yeah. He's not infallible on everything. That's not the doctrine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you are absolutely correct.
Yeah.
He's infallible ex cathedra when he makes
Right.
an ex
Yeah.
cathedra statement. That's
Yeah.
true. But
Right.
even that is, I mean, I guess I could maybe grant infallibility if it's like a council and they are also doing ex cathedra statements,
Right.
not
Yeah.
like everything the council says, right?
Right.
So I
Yeah.
mean, I do like the centralization because I want to know what specific doctrine I have to believe if I want to be a fully part of the church, I guess. Hinduism does not have that centralization. I mean, if Jains had that centralization, which was like they basically created a kind of very systematic theology, and they had these hierarchy, right? Some level of hierarchy in their in their churches, right? Or
Yeah.
not churches, temples, I guess, right? Um, um, then because I want to know, like specifically, I want to know the claims here, the doctrines, right? What certain dogmas they believe, and you have to believe, right? If you want to be the part of here, right? So I do like that centralization. So I think
Right, but you surely the the doctrine is more important than the organization of the church.
doctrines are important, but my point is more like you have to kind of like keep those doctrines, I guess, like like think of it this way, right? Like church has that catechism, Catholic Church, right?
Yeah.
Everything is written, they have the catechism, they have this, a lot of those documents are like kept safe, right? Very secured, right? Um, and when a priest or like a bishop, they need like a lot of education. I think you need a master's of theology degree to become a priest or something, right? Um, I think in Jainism and Hinduism, it's much more diverse, and it can be
Yeah,
like
I think that's right. I think
who is
that's
the
right. Yeah.
council, right? Who's the council? Because
Right, but I think
yeah,
the here's the thing though. If one religion has the organization that you like, with the hierarchy and so on,
yeah,
but it tells you something that just looks to you to be utterly immoral, and the other one has sort of no hierarchy and you don't like the structure of it, but the doctrine seems more moral.
yeah.
Which one would you go with?
I would go with the Jains, I guess, in this case, but
Right,
it's more
right.
like it's more like, well, I'm not a Catholic or Eastern Orthodox right now. I
Yeah,
know some of the beliefs, but it's more like once you have that structure, if that
yeah,
structure eventually changes. No, I
right.
mean the doctrine can eventually, I think, change and then be fixed like for a long time. And I
Yeah.
do like that. Like once universal salvation, I want universal salvation to become a dogma in both Eastern Orthodox, Catholic, I guess, like all the
Well, it
church.
might happen. Who knows, right? But
Might happen, yeah.
it, I don't see how it really changes the character of God, those in the Bible. The fact that he commanded, I mean, presumably the animals would have suffered horrendously
Yeah.
if this were to happen. And there are cases, the Amalekites similarly, they're ordered to be slaughtered, and their animals are also ordered to be slaughtered. Um, and of course, when Saul doesn't kill all the animals, God gets really angry. Um, now, even if the animals have universal salvation, to me, that doesn't really change the fact that God ordered this horrendous suffering. Like they can have the salvation, presumably, without the suffering, then the suffering is unexplained, even with the salvation. Like to me, it just doesn't help at all.
Yeah. So like this is the part where I guess I want to talk about like some of the tabs I have opened. I know some of the like responses to this, and
Hmm.
to me they're very plausible. It's called holistic theodicy. Let me share my screen. Just a second. Okay. Yeah. So, okay, can you see the screen, Phil?
No. Now I can. Yeah, now I can.
Right. Fantastic. So the thing with like animal suffering and
Hmm.
universal salvation, so we already have universal salvation, right? We don't have eternal hell. Now we are just thinking about animal suffering right now.
Okay.
One
Yeah.
universe, right? And you say you do not find it plausible all this suffering, right? Now, of course, you
Well, what I
also
don't find plausible is that there's a good reason for the suffering. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, there's
obviously,
good reason, right?
that animal suffer is extremely plausible. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I think you also say you don't like your recent paper, right? This one, soul making theodicy for animals, and you say
Yeah.
Trimurti's response is still not plausible.
Yeah, but I should point out what we're really highlighting is
Yeah.
not so much the theosis that Doherty so let's put this in, give a bit of context for those watching.
Yeah.
Right, so Trent Doherty published this paper, sorry, not paper, a book,
Book.
um, where he argues that animals will be resurrected in the afterlife, and then they'll look back on the suffering that they had in this life, and they'll see that it was part of God's great plan, that it all made their souls and so on. It gave them the saint-making opportunities, blah, blah, blah. And they'll endorse it. They'll say, yes, it was worth it. And according to Doherty, this endorsement is absolutely crucial. He's getting this from Chisholm and Adams. So they have this notion of what's called the defeat of evil. So in order for evil to be defeated, it is not enough for there to simply be compensation in the afterlife. And in
Yes.
fact, Doherty gives this example of the Gatinator, where basically Bill Gates shows up at your house, smashes everything up, including all your sort of family heirlooms and treasured photos, and then gives you $1 billion. And you're going to say, yeah, okay, I've been more than compensated, uh, I'd, yeah, but still, Bill Gates would not be justified if he did that, right? Um, why he picks on Bill Gates, I don't know. I guess he's just giving an example of a rich person. But anyway, so it's not enough to have compensation. What he argues is that you have to endorse your suffering. You have to say it was worth it. And that's the bit that we say is basically there's no reason to believe that. It basically comes to form something similar to skeptical theism, where you basically say, well, there is, I don't see any good reason for the suffering, but there must be one if there's a good God. Um, there's like a hidden good, it's a promissory note, but we never get to see that note, what's on it. Oh, sorry, we get to see the promise, but we don't get to see, how it's actually going to be delivered. Why would the animal, when given these rational capacities, look back on their life and say it wasn't worth it? That's what we find especially implausible and without justification.
Yeah. So, yeah. So the thing is that, Phil, when you compare, so when I compare all these views, right? Atheism,
Hmm.
naturalistic atheism,
Hmm.
limited God theism, and triomni God theism,
Hmm.
right? And when we are doing this comparison, right, the response, like, so when Trent Doherty says that the animals would endorse it, right?
Hmm.
I now it does not necessarily need to be purely cognitive. I think it can be a kind of a internal feeling or instinctually, right? It's
Okay. Yeah.
not, to me, it's not necessary that animals cognitively, like as in like speaking, say this, but they need to have this feeling that the endorses, all things considered, it was worth it. And I
Right.
now now it seems to me that that feeling, given triomni God, right? Given all the, I guess you have the arguments for the existence of God and universal salvation, given all that, given like natural theology, theodicy, multiple theodicies, right? Not just one. So there's like I don't know if you heard of Josh Rasmussen's great story theodicy, um, or like valuable situations theodicy, where he says that there are certain goods like valuable connections, relationships, um, um, along with like being a part of a,
Yeah, I mean, this is something Doherty focuses on as well, I think. He's often quoting like Tolkien and, you know,
yeah.
basically saying this is
So
great narrative and we'll be happy to play our part in it. But I just, for me, an animal dying in a tar pit and they get resurrected and they go, why couldn't you just give me an instinct not to go into the tar pit? You
yeah,
know,
so
I
like
can't
this
see
this is the,
any reason at all that God could give to say why not and why, and for that, I think, you know,
so
I don't see
let
them
me
endorsing their
let
suffering.
let me sort of, I don't know if you will find, I think you probably will not find what I'm going to say plausible, but let me give this, let me tell you why I find that plausible, right?
Okay, okay.
Like we are talking about the specific tokens here, right? Like tokens as in like, okay, this particular animal died this way.
Mhm.
Now, it seems like given that specific point of time, given the perspective that animal had at that time, right? Given like the animal right at that point of time does not know, right, what or does not have this feeling, right, the of this whole great story, right, or does not have this awareness or this instinct of of heaven, I guess, when the animal is in heaven, that instinct about God, right? God's presence, I guess, at that time, right? So in that specific point in time, in that specific location, yeah, at that time, it's like the animal, and even you, or I guess a lot of people are justified in like, where is God here, right? And and at that time, if even if you don't believe at that time, even if you don't find it plausible, my point is just this: if you have a response to the types, general types, rather than specific tokens. Like, I think you can be skeptical theist about the specific tokens, right? So again, I want to emphasize this. This is important. I like skeptical theism. I consider skeptical theism similarly to what Josh Rasmussen considers skeptical theism to be, as a kind of a um like a like when you turn on a radio, right? I guess think of volume, right? Volume. You can increase volume or decrease volume, right? I consider skeptical theism to be like that. If you are like a full skeptical theist who like I don't know, I think it was Bergman. Bergman is like skeptical theist. What's his name? Bergman.
Dykstra was the other one.
Probably Dijkstra, yeah.
Yeah.
Perry Hendricks, maybe,
Hmm.
right? Like, if you are that full skeptical theist rather than what Josh is, I think Josh is like a modest one. I think Jonathan Fuqua is also very, very modest skeptical theist. And basically, he just argues that, right? That the four standard theistic responses to the evidential problem of evil are basically theodicy, reformed epistemology, natural theology, and skeptical theism. Right. It's somewhat common for theists to combine reformed epistemology and skeptical theism, or natural theology and theodicy. Right. An insufficiently appreciated possibility is that of combining all four of these positions into a more holistic response to the evidential problem of evil. Right. The chief hurdle to doing that is that it seems that skeptical theism isn't compatible with either natural theology or theodicy, right? Um,
Hmm.
the first appearance, however, is misleading, and interestingly, certain theists have implicitly put forth a holistic response to the problem of evil, and I think he's probably, I think we can apply this to Doherty, Josh Rasmussen, even David Bentley Hart, and these. Although David Bentley Hart like does not like to give any answers to the problem of evil, I guess like he doesn't. He's very anti-theodicy, but like implicitly, these more compassionate theists or left-leaning theists, I think, are pretty much giving a kind of holistic theodicy, right? And in this
I'll
paper,
tell you what, why don't you give a short summary of what how you see this holistic
so yeah,
theodicy?
so how I
Because
see this,
we're running out of time a little bit, so
yeah,
why
gotcha,
don't you just
gotcha.
give the quick summary of
Yeah, yeah.
what it is?
Let me sort of give you quick summary. So can I stop sharing this, right?
Yeah,
I
please do. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, sure. So in brief, I will be a very modest skeptical theist about the particular token of evil that you just said.
yeah.
Why did that particular animal burned in this particular way, suffered in this particular way? Why did extinction happen? Why did those specific things happen? I'll be modest skeptical theist about that. Like, as Michael Ree would say, right now in this moment and given our cognitive limitations, like we are beings with like 3 pound of piece of meat, 3 pound piece of meat between our ears,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Okay.
God is omniscient, right? He knows all connections, every single connection. He knows us and all the creation that he made more than we know ourselves, right? He
Yeah, yeah.
knows
I mean, that's standard skeptical theism. All right. So
internal
how does this holistic approach differ?
much better.
Go on.
much better than all of us.
Give it to me.
Yeah. So modest skeptical theism about the token. And
Okay.
when we talk about the general types of animal suffering,
Mhm. Okay.
then I would give the theodicy of the what Trent Doherty would say, the great story theodicy, basically,
Okay.
that
Yeah.
each being ultimately will have this fundamental feeling that whatever happened, all was ultimately worth it. All was ultimately worth it.
Okay.
And now we are all happy forever. We shall be happy forever, right? All beings, all sentient beings,
Right.
even I guess I'm even willing to say flowers and trees, right? All of them, right,
Okay.
will say this. That's my response to the problem of evil,
So
right?
it's basically combining skeptical theism with sort of,
Theodicy.
or you can call it great narrative theodicy or skull making in
Yeah.
some sense.
We are combining these two things. I would also combine
Mhm.
reformed epistemology. Reformed epistemology basically says that, roughly, it's very roughly, it says that some people will become theists. This is in the reformed tradition because God's grace. So technically, even the intuitions that you have. So that's why I'm telling you this, Phil, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't find what I'm saying plausible. I don't find what you are saying plausible because it's fundamentally about intuitions at this point, right? And
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, if you fundamentally think there is a good God, then something like this should be true, right?
And it's also
But
about intuitions about suffering, Phil. Phil. It's also about
yeah.
intuitions about suffering, right? So consider like maybe you are not willing to grant that much suffering that God can allow. I'm willing to grant that, right? Like
Well,
I'm,
let me ask you a question then.
yeah,
What wouldn't you grant? Like, is there something that you could read in the Bible or observe in the world that would say, ah, there can't be a, or no, let's do one at a time, actually. Let's
yeah,
go with the biblical text. So something that God either does or
yeah,
commands
sure.
that looks so vile. I mean, suppose God commanded, you know, every Chinese person to be executed, all right, put in a gas chamber and killed. Suppose
Yeah.
God commanded that, right? And suppose that was in the Bible. Would you say this character that I read about isn't good? I mean, is there something that he could command like that, or something else? Pick, you can imagine whatever scenario you like, that would force you to say this character isn't good.
Yeah, and my honest answer is that there is something that will make me like this is not God. Fuck him, right?
Okay, what would that
But
be?
I don't know. Like I don't know, right?
You
Like
can't
so
imagine
I
you can't
think
imagine a scenario that would say this
the example that
character
you
is.
gave about like Holocaust, basically,
Yeah.
literally commanding Holocaust right in front. And I ask him, yo, like let's just suppose he's commanding me, do that.
Mm,
Do that right now. I'm
mm,
commanding you to do that. If he said that to me, like, Abraham followed God, right? Like God told Abraham to kill his child, and he has
yeah.
full faith that God will stop him. I will say, nah, you do it. I will tell this to God. Yeah, I'm willing to disobey. I'm willing
But
to
would you be willing to say that character, be they real or fictional, you just know that that is a command that character is given. You don't even know if this is a fictional story or it's happening to you. But if that character gives that command, that character can't be perfectly good.
even, yeah, I mean, like if he commands me, as I said, right, like like you do it, I don't know. I mean, no, no. I mean, it's like there is a certain point at which I'd say this is not God, but it's like
Right.
I'm
So
willing.
why isn't, let's say, the slaughter of the Amalekites or the Great Flood or the Ten Plagues,
Yeah,
uh, why aren't any of these in that category then? Because these look
yeah.
like
So
they're as bad as I mean, how much worse can you
the
can you
reason
get?
that
You
yeah,
know?
yeah. And the reason for that is, well, one thing I can also do, I just reject that they happened, or I can say that that was
Oh,
not
okay, but
by
to me, it
God,
doesn't matter that
right?
whether they happened or not. Like to me, that I just don't care whether they happened or not because
Yeah.
we'll probably never know. And uh,
My
to
point
me,
is
the,
that
the
that's
point the
not
point
commanded
is
by
not that
even
they
God.
happened. It's not that they happened. It's that the author clearly thinks that they're moral. The
Yeah,
narrative is telling you that the God is good and he
yeah,
orders this sort of thing. So to me, I don't need to believe that Star Wars is a true story
yeah,
in order for me to condemn the Empire when they blew
yeah.
up the planet.
And I
I
can
don't
say
don't
that the
have
author
to
was
believe
wrong.
that it's really happened. Right? You can judge fictional characters as well as you can judge real people,
So
right?
I can say
Yeah.
the author was wrong. The author was said that God commanded this and God is good. I would say the author was wrong, at least on more, I would say on both fronts. I can say that on both fronts. I'm not an inerrantist, right? Like biblical
Yeah.
literalist, like
Yeah.
inerrantist, right? So I'm willing to say the author was wrong about both morality and factuality of that event. Right.
Right, but then let me ask you, what's your understanding of God's relationship to the text? Because Paul does say that all scripture is God breathed. Now, of course, exactly what God breathed can be
Means,
interpreted,
yeah,
but what's your understanding of God's relationship to the text? Because if the author was wrong on that, why couldn't he have been wrong on like thing after thing
yeah.
after thing? I mean, why not just throw the whole lot out, you know?
Right.
Um,
So, so I believe that like Christians believe that the Bible is divinely inspired, not, I guess,
dictated.
dictated, right?
Right.
I think in
Okay.
Islam, the mainstream
But
view,
then
it was literally dictated, right?
yeah, it was. Yeah. By the
But
ancient
yeah, but
world.
in Christianity, I think the mainstream view is it's just inspired, divinely inspired.
Right. So unpack that for me. Like take that text, the commanding of
Yeah,
the Amalekites, right? The
yeah,
slaughter of the Amalekites. Um, is God inspiring that text? What's his relationship to that
yeah.
particular text?
So we can believe that the books are divinely inspired, but and the authors are also divinely inspired, right? But we can still say that they were wrong about a bunch of things or some things, right? Now, why do I not throw out the whole thing,
Hmm?
right? Why do not? At what point is do we throw out the whole thing? And to me, I think this is something I'd say I'd say depends on each individual, Phil, like how much you are willing to tolerate, right? um, Given universal salvation, right? Given the compassionate hermeneutics, as I say, like how much willing we are, because like deontologists are less willing to allow because they don't believe, sorry, they believe in like killing versus allowing distinction, right? Deontologists generally believe that like you can allow suffering, but you can't do it yourself, right? I don't believe that, right? So to me, I'm more than willing to say, yeah, God can command certain horrible things. Um, if
But doesn't that if commanding horrible things doesn't make him horrible, what would make him horrible?
What would make him horrible would
Yeah,
be,
if commanding a
yeah.
horrible thing
So
doesn't make him
in
horrible,
so
what
yeah.
what
So
what
have you
would?
heard of the view called satisficing consequentialism?
Yeah, I think I understand it, but why don't you tell me?
Yeah. So
Because I
so
understand what
just quickly,
satisficing is in
yeah. So just
economics.
quickly,
Yeah,
satisficing consequentialism says that a being has to meet the satisficing bar
yeah,
in their actions, in their
yeah.
feelings, right? Even in their dispositions, right? This satisficing bar once met, this think of this satisficing bar as a kind of minimal decency bar, right?
Right. Okay.
My view is that God does not cross this satisficing bar. He can command certain horrible things sometimes, but as long as he does not cross this satisficing bar, we can say that he's good, right? Like consider all this suffering, right? Like whether God commanded this or not, whether animal suffering was commanded by God or not, the badness does not just evaporate, right? To me, fundamentally, suffering is bad. It's not the causal chains, right? Like if a child dies, starves to death, now whether someone starved the child to death or not, the bad thing, the fundamentally bad thing is that the child starved to death.
Yeah, I know, I agree with you.
To me, that's the fundamental thing.
Yeah.
I'm a consequentialist, right? So generally, consequentialists. I mean, there are some consequentialists who believe in moral responsibility. So they would say, like, if someone actively, intentionally kills someone,
Yeah, but I don't. That distinction is probably not going to be relevant for us here.
yeah, for
So
us, okay, okay,
the
cool,
point
cool,
is,
cool.
okay,
Basic point is that if God does not cross the, like, if sorry, if God does minimalist decent action, that is, meets the satisficing bar, right?
right.
That's really it, right? Now we can allow some levels of suffering, right? And if we have to allow, if we like, if whether you are triomni-theist or limited God theist, you have to say, well, suffering exists, right? You cannot deny the suffering that exists, right? So
Well, of
theists
course,
basically
yeah.
have to say that there is a satisficing bar that God has met, and all the suffering is for the greater good, and all the evils shall be defeated.
But then that's just sort of skeptical theism again, right?
I mean, skeptical theism
You're
is
basically saying, look,
very, I guess,
I don't
more
see. I mean,
stronger, right? Like Hendrick's skeptical theism and like Bergman's skeptical theism are much more stronger, right? And the criticism of their skeptical theism is basically like, you, if it's that strong, then you don't have any theory. You cannot use any theodicy. You cannot even use natural theology because
I
it
would go
undermines
even further than
fine
that. I
tuning
would
and
say
stuff,
you
right?
can't even have a view that God is good because
Yeah,
suppose, I mean, the classic example, right? You have a child with leukemia. You pray for the leukemia to go away, and it doesn't, and they die. And you say, well, look, God knows best. Maybe the child was going to grow up to be the next Hitler, right? So maybe it was good, even though it appeared to be bad. So there was a hidden good. We can't see it
we can't
because
see.
we're
Yeah,
limited. But of course, what I would say is just flip it around. Let's suppose you prayed for the leukemia to go away, and it did go away, and it looked like a miracle. And all the doctors said, this is a miracle. Well, you couldn't praise God for that because, for all you know, the child is going to grow up to be the next Hitler,
yep,
right? So, for
yep.
everything that appears to be bad, you could say there's a hidden good, and we just don't know it.
Yeah, I think
But
that's
I could
what
just say for
Paul.
every hidden good, so everything that appears to be good, there could be a hidden bad.
Yeah,
So you
so
can't
that's
praise God for anything that he does because, for all you know, it's actually bad.
yeah, so that's what I think Paul Draper also said, right? The unknown
He's
goods.
got something similar. I think his view
Yeah,
is slightly different from my memory, and I could be remembering it wrong. I
yeah,
think it's like, well, if you have take a bad thing, skeptical theist said, well, there could be an unknown good on top of it, and he just said, yeah, but there could be an unknown bad on top of it.
yeah,
So he basically focuses on the balancing out of the good. It could be balanced, well, not balanced. It could be even worse,
yeah,
right? Whereas my view is slightly different to that. I'm focusing on the apparent goods. I mean, maybe Draper says this. I can't remember exactly what he says,
yeah, yeah.
but
Okay,
I think it's slightly different what I'm saying. But it's
okay,
very
cool,
similar. At least it's
cool,
very
cool.
similar.
So as I said, right, that's why I feel I'm not a full skeptical theist, right?
Yeah.
I'm more like modest one. I am willing to give theodicy, reformed epistemology, and of course you have natural theology, which is more like cumulative case, right? But thinking
Yeah.
about the arguments for the existence
Yeah.
of God, thinking about like what atheist philosophical atheists have to offer, you can compare. And I think to me, this holistic response, as I said, Jonathan Fuqua made in his paper, to me, this is ultimately plausible, right? And that's, I guess, that's really it, right? It's,
I guess that's where I mean, I guess what you also so to my challenge, let's just see if we can summarize things before we kind of finish up
yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah, sure.
My challenge is let's just well we were supposed to do two challenges actually, one on the text and one on the natural world, right?
Yeah,
Um, so maybe you've answered the text one. I want to come back to it just so we can summarize things. But actually,
Yeah,
let's just do the natural world one before we come back to that. So let's take that example of the animal who goes into the tar pit. And our point is that animals have instincts to avoid fires. So God could have given them an instinct to avoid tar pits or
yeah,
predator traps, whatever you want to call them.
yeah,
But he didn't. It could easily have done so.
yes.
Why didn't he? Like the fact that he didn't seems to show that he's either, he's not trying it, omni. Because a triune God surely would do so. It seems obvious to me. Why is it not obvious to you?
Yeah, so like did okay, my summary quickly.
Mhm.
Because like the particular token of evil that you talked about, tar pit, deer
Mhm.
just going there, why can God do that? I will use in this token case, I'll use modest skeptical theism, which is that there could be certain goods that we don't know about. God is omniscient, we are not. And the for the types of general evil, like all the suffering, right? That feeling of suffering, that experience of suffering, I will give the theodicy, right? And the theodicy, basically, you can think of Josh Rasmussen theodicy, the great story theodicy,
But what
and
great
the
story could
defeat
you
condition.
even imagine? Like, why not? Like, it just seems to me I can't even imagine a story that
That's the thing,
would
right? Like,
justify that.
yeah, I mean, types of for so for the token, I gave like skeptical theism, right? Modest skeptical theism. For the type of evil, I think theodicy is plausible, right? Like the great story theodicy does become plausible when each sentient being comes to have this fundamental feeling or instinct that whatever happened ultimately was worth it.
But why would they think that? I just don't get. I
Yeah, I
just
mean
don't get
that's the
it.
thing, right?
Why
Like,
would they think that? Why wouldn't they go? It wasn't worth it. I should have had that instinct, and I could have avoided that horrible fate. I could have died peacefully in my sleep.
yeah, I mean
You
right
know,
now I right now I cannot tell you that, right? Like
right?
specifically, like because we are not in heaven right now, so we don't know, right? So
Or are we?
that's the thing, right? Yeah, that's really it. Though those two are like my responses, modest skeptical
Okay.
theism and
Yeah.
and also theodicy. And I would also bring like reformed epistemology here, which is that the intuition that I have, you don't. Um, right now we just have fundamentally differing intuitions. I guess that's really it. There's nothing that can be done to move each other on
Yeah.
this.
I
Um,
guess so.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing is like natural. So I talked about natural.
Let me throw one last thing at
Yeah.
you, actually.
Yeah. Sure, sure.
Because I suggested this to my friend Alex O'Connor, and he's quite taken with it. Um, and that's the idea of Gnosticism or a certain Gnostic cosmologies. And they
Yeah,
believe that the Old Testament God was evil and that Jesus was come to sort of save us from the Old Testament God.
yeah,
Now, given that um, Jesus, well, in many cases, not all cases, because we still have the story of Legion to deal with, but um, at least in many cases, he doesn't seem to order like the torturing of animals like the Old Testament God does. Um, so wouldn't that make more sense? Why wouldn't that make more
yeah.
sense?
Like there's an evil god and the good god, right? The good god is
Yeah.
like fighting
But no,
an
in
evil,
particular, it's
but
not
the
just that there's an evil God and a good God. I mean, that's Zoroastrianism and, you know, uh, but specific to Gnosticism
yeah,
is that the Old Testament God is is the evil God, and
yeah,
Jesus is the good God. Um, why would that not seem like a plausible story to you?
yeah. One reason is simple is that, well, who created the evil one, right? It's the good god, right? So I mean, it's like he did create the evil
Well, I
one.
don't think the Gnostics actually think. I think the original God in Gnosticism is totally unknowable, um, which seems like a sort of logical extension of skeptical theism. I mean, if you think God's reasons are unknown, why not just say his nature is unknown?
Yeah, I mean that would lead to like we don't know if he's omnibenevolent or not. That would be an issue.
I think so. I mean, I actually
Yeah.
think that is
That's the
an
thing,
optic
right? So
view.
if
Yeah.
omnibenevolence is gone, then well, we theism is gone, I guess. Right. So to me, the point is more like, and I think if agnostics didn't. if Gnostics did not believe that the good God created the evil God, if they believe that the good and evil are like,
I mean, I think the narrative is like there's this unknowable God. They don't even give it a name because it's so mysterious.
okay,
Then there's these emanations, these beings that are created. I'm not even sure that they're created by
yeah,
the original God because the original God is so mysterious. The first being is Barbaro, and then these other emanations appear. And one of them goes bad, if you like. So it's not, I'm not sure that the original God created the evil God, but
yeah, I
rather
mean, but
they
it's like,
create that there are these things that emanate from the original being. Um, and one of them goes bad.
yeah, so I mean, if that is the case, right, like if the God is like that unknown, that much unknown, I mean, around half of the arguments of the God that are most plausible are also gone, like Dustin Crumit's moral knowledge argument, his psychophysical harmony argument, right? I think some
Yeah.
of the most plausible fine-tuning arguments would also be gone. Argument from
Well, no, actually,
consciousness.
I think the fine-tuning argument does better on Gnosticism than on traditional Christianity. In fact, I don't think it even works for traditional Christianity, but I think it could work for Gnosticism. So let
Okay.
me just run this argument by you. Um,
Yeah.
so there's this sort of paradox pointed out by Hans Halvorsen. I don't know if you're familiar with it. So basically, what he says is what you could think of it. Maybe you could think of it this way. I'm not sure if it's exactly what how Hans Halvorsen would express it this way. I think he would. But if you ask the question, what's the plausibility of theism given fine tuning? You might say high, right? But let's ask it the other way. What's the plausibility of fine tuning given theism? Should we expect fine tuning given theism? And now we can ask, what is fine tuning? It's a statement that the probability of life is low. Well, it's really not probability of life, I think, but the phase space of possible universes in that phase space, the life emitting one is a small proportion of the phase space.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So now what Hans Savorsen says is that's actually really surprising on theism because if I think that God can overcome these low probabilities with his
Yeah.
omnibenevolence,
Omnipotence
sorry,
towards.
omnipotence, sorry, his
Yeah.
omnipotence,
Omnipotence. Yeah.
um, then yeah, he can overcome these low probabilities. But
Exactly. Yeah.
what Hal Wilson says is, I think God is the root of everything. He's the base of all existence. So he is also the author of those probabilities. So if I think God loves life, and I'm asked now, given that I think that God is good and he's all powerful and he's the source of all being, what should I expect that diagram to look like? How much of the phase space should be life emitting and how much shouldn't be life emitting? Well, I think that God would affect it. If God wants there to be life, he should set the probability for life to be high.
Yeah.
But what we find is that the probability for life is low. So
So,
that's actually, let me just finish the argument and
yeah,
then
sure, sure.
give you the reply. So
Yeah.
then, so that actually looks like disconfirmation of theism rather than confirmation of theism.
Yeah.
But if you put it in a Gnostic setting, now we can imagine that the original God, right, didn't want there to be a physical universe because in the Gnostic tradition, the physical universe is the bad thing. We
Yeah.
suffer because we're physical beings. So
Yeah.
physical reality is bad. And what we should be is these spiritual beings. And so one can imagine, if you like, think of it with the analogy of a game of poker. I don't want the dealer to keep getting aces. So I set up the game of poker, which has the rules such that if it's played properly, you know, the dealer won't keep getting aces. But someone finds a way to cheat and then they keep getting aces. It looks like they've overcome an opposite intention from what the creator of the game wanted, right? So, so if you like, imagine an analogy with like code, like the Enigma code. You send this message that is basically it looks like it's impossible to crack. But hey, someone really clever like Alan Turing comes along and cracks it.
Yeah.
Um, so if in a way, then God set the game up so that physical life would just not exist. It would be almost impossible to do, you know. But then along comes the villain god in the Gnostic Sethian cosmology. It's called
Yeah.
Yaldabaoth, and Yaldabaoth finds a way to create a physical universe. He finds that full small space of interface space so that people can suffer, and he goes for it.
Okay.
So do you see
So,
the argument there? That basically it
yes.
seems like it fits Gnosticism much better than
Yeah,
traditional
but here's
Christianity.
the issue though. Like Gnostics, as you said, right? They believed in God is like totally unknown, right? You said that, right?
It is mysterious, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mysterious, right? So,
But I think one thing I think they would say is whatever the intention of the original God is, that that physical reality wasn't one of them. You know,
okay,
they
okay.
basically
I
see it
mean, so I
as
guess he
so
was
I guess they know that because
okay.
that's a very strong belief in Gnosticism that
Okay.
physical reality is bad and we're all spiritual beings and we should live in
But
the
I mean,
spirit.
if that is the case, then it's like, okay, God is, we don't know if God is omnibenevolent, but in this case, he's
Yeah,
not
I think so. I think that
specifically
they
there.
would have
So,
to say that.
so
Yeah.
if they would have to say that, then yeah, we can run into, so you can run a kind of a arbitrary limits argument, right? Like that seems arbitrary. Like, why not omnibenevolence then? I mean, like, why not full omnibenevolence then? Like, why is this specific thing God just dislikes, but is okay with all the other, right? So I mean,
Right.
it's like, yeah, I mean, yeah. And when it comes to fine tuning, you are correct. That like just fine tuning given theism, right? Like, of course, we would expect God, who is tri-omni, to immediately create everyone in heaven.
Yeah. I mean, I guess
Immediately,
that's where it all boils down to. I
right?
think
Right?
personally, my intuition is just make heaven. Why bother
Yeah,
with
just
earth?
make an
Like,
heaven.
just
My
don't
intuition
bother.
is exactly the
Heaven's
same.
supposed to be this amazing place. Just make that.
Yeah, just make that. And my view is that he has made that, but he also made this, right? So of course now we are talking why this, right? Now again we can basically we run into like problem of evil again, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we
And
do. Yeah.
all the same responses just
Yeah.
begin, right?
Yeah.
So I mean it's yeah, yeah, I guess it's really a fundamentally disagreement about intuitions, moral intuitions, right?
I think these things, that's what they boil
It's
down to. You know,
yeah,
people have different intuitions about,
yeah.
I guess, what the world should look like if God existed. And I think it
But
should be
I
heaven
guess
only, I guess. And
I guess I
you
should
think it should be heaven
mention
and earth.
I guess I should mention though, Phil, is that
Mhm.
um um th- everybody has intuitions, but there are certain intuitions that are much more fundamental, right? Which is the intuition about love and compassion, right? Which is that um like I can allow God to allow certain levels of suffering, but I cannot. But if like eternal torture is just something it's like we are already like you are already not convinced, even though I'm a universalist, right? Even though I believe in
Yeah, as I
universality.
said, I think universalism is way better than torture in hell. Like, let's all agree on that.
Let's all agree to that,
But I
right?
don't think it's enough
It's
to.
enough. Yeah. So
It's not enough for
this
me.
is this
No.
is what I love, right? This is what I
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
It's about enough. How much is enough, right? The
Right.
intuition about enough.
Yeah.
So I always do this, right? I already say this to theists, I guess, who believe in eternal torture, because I care about more people moving towards a more compassionate view ultimately. Even if they
Mhm.
become atheist, I guess I'm cool with that. But the more
Right.
main point is this, right? I tell this to, or I will tell this to these eternal torture theists, which is that look, guys, we are already testing the plausibility here. We are already at a critical point where some atheists are not even cool that even if you give universal salvation, it still does not seem plausible to them because they are not able to see the good right now, right? They
Right.
are not able to notice it, they are not able to see it. And if you bring in eternal torture, it immediately just fucks up stuff, right? Just
Well,
totally
I mean, it's as
destroy.
bad as it could possibly be. I can't think of anything worse than eternal
Right.
torture,
Yeah,
quite frankly.
exactly.
So a God
Exactly.
that would be happy with that is about as evil as a God as you can possibly imagine.
Possibility. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
In which
And
case, Satan is the good guy because he
Yeah,
rebelled against this evil, horrible God.
piece of shit, right? Yeah. So so that's the thing, right? I mean, so I say that yeah, I mean, look, I'm totally cool if some people remain atheist for their whole life. I guess sometimes I would just say like if the atheist is feeling really sad about because I think in atheism, I think it was Pine Creek. Do you know Doug Pine Creek?
No, I do not.
Oh, I think he said it. He's still an atheist, by the way. He's more, I think, conservative, politically right-leaning, right? And I think he said one time, if you are in a desert stranded, you are poor, you are alone, no one's going to help you, and you die, you starve to death. That's it. That's it. That's the end of your story. You're dead, you're destroyed. That's a horrible thing. That's a horrible tragedy. That's that is ultimately naturalism, right? That is what atheism ultimately is, right? So I think some atheists might, at certain points, will feel extremely sad given these all these tragedies. And I want to give them this additional option that look, sure, this all these horrible things are there, tragedies exist, but I guess if you find certain some of these things plausible, right? Then it's like I you know that show where there is a Rick Gervais show, Afterlife. I don't know, is that the name of the show where the child asks Ricky, will I meet you in heaven or will I go to heaven? And the child is dying of cancer, right? And Ricky says to the child, yes, right. Yes, I will see you in heaven, right? Um, and that's that is something really deep, you know. Um, like I don't think you would be able to I don't think I would be able to say to the child who is dying of cancer that God does not exist and you're just going to die. That's life. That's
Yeah,
unfair. Yeah.
I agree. It's very comforting to know you get an
It,
afterlife. But you could imagine an afterlife without God. In
it's
fact,
harder, I
it's
guess.
harder, but I can imagine.
Yeah.
Here's one for you. So
Yeah.
let's just imagine that the universe is infinite and that you are a pattern of information. That's kind of what you are,
Yeah.
embodied in a physical brain and body and so on.
Yeah.
Now imagine that there's only finite number of configurations for physical bodies to be in. Then it's plausible that actually your life will replay over and over and over again,
But I mean, look,
infinitely many times.
but if someone suffered Holocaust and they repeat over and
Well,
over,
true, but you
you
will live again. So you maybe you could appeal to that as comfort. You
but
could say
I
that,
mean,
don't
it's
worry,
not
you
that.
might die, but your life's going to happen again, and there may be a different version of it, a better one. So look forward to that.
But it can also be the bad, worse one,
Well, you
right?
don't mention that because you're just trying to be um, palliative, aren't you?
But but I guess I think my version
I
is.
mean, you could do exactly the same for the God one. You could say you might go to hell or heaven. I don't know. It
I
could
mean,
get a lot worse in a minute.
if you are an eternal hell believer, right?
Yeah,
If
yeah. I
it's
mean,
worse,
obviously, if you're a universalist,
it's
yeah,
more optimistic, right? That's my channel's name, right?
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
sure, it is. Yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
That's
Yeah,
my view. So
yeah.
great, great. It was just wonderful to chat with you, Phil.
No
And
problem.
I
No
and I
problem.
like your objections, by the way. I
Thank you.
do
Yeah,
sometimes
and yeah.
want to be
Well,
reminded of how
and I
scary the
definitely
world is.
like your universalism. It's way more positive than many other versions of Christianity. So
Thank you.
I'm
Thank
a
you.
big fan.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Phil. Thank you.
All right. Brilliant.
I
All right. We'll
I
speak
hope to
soon
meet
then.
you in
All right.
heaven one day. Okay,
All right.
bye.
Yeah, maybe. All right. Cheers then.
Bye.
Bye bye.